want to ask about 2 Kings 2, and, well, my New King James Bible put these two parts together, but they do kind of fit, but it's where Elijah with the S. It says he performs miracles, but it's where he healed the water in the city, and that part of it was not my first reason I wanted to ask this question, but then it says in verse 23, then he went up from there to Bethel, and as he was going up the road, some youths came from the city and mocked him and said to him, "Go up, you bald head, go up, you bald head." And I'm not making fun of bald-headed guys because I'm married to one. So he turned around and looked at them and pronounced a curse on them in the name of the Lord. And 2 female bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the youths. Then he went from there to Mount Carmel, and from there he returned to Samaria. But I guess what I'm wondering is, in King James, I think it says, I'm bringing out the artillery, I got my parallel. In King James, it actually says, and there came forth 2 she-bears out of the wood and tare 42 of them. I think one of the other translations said they actually got killed. But, okay, and maul. The word maul is like to handle roughly, bruise, or tear, or actually like the maul, it's a tool, which kind of probably looks like a sledgehammer with an axe head, a long-handled tool. But if there were 42 injured, there were probably more kids. Now, are they young kids or a bunch of pagan fraternity guys? Were there any Hebrew kids? I guess what I wonder too is Elisha had a right to pronounce a curse on them because nobody wants to be ganged up on. And it says he was bald. We don't know how old he was, but he was probably a little bit older. And even if it was grade school kids, a whole bunch of them ganging up on him, that wouldn't be right. But I do know in the Old Testament, there's places where people mocked and ridiculed him, like King David when the guy was yelling at him and throwing rocks and when he was leaving town. And then when Hannah was crying at the altar and moving her lips, and Eli was calling her a drunk, and she answered him, honestly, but she didn't return, ugliness for being treated roughly. And I know in the New Testament, Jesus says, if people curse you, you should bless them. And there's a place where the disciples wanted to call down fire, but he's like, no, don't do that. But on the other hand, it was kind of divine comeuppance. So I guess in today's world, any career gets picked on, and nobody's immune in American society. I mean, people like to pick on pastors, but I guess, could somebody call down on a curse? And I think one of my Bibles said something about because Elisha represented the true and living God, and he was speaking for God, and these were pagan people picking on him, that God zapped him. Well, the 2 she-bears, and I'm sure it was divine, but on the other hand, were they outside the outskirts of town, and where it's not safe, so there's dangerous animals. But also, too, in the original Bible, well, in my New King James, it hooks healing of the water with this. And you would think, now it doesn't say how fast the water got healed, but it just said he healed the water, and from then on, the water was good. And the land, it was no longer barren. It kind of implies almost that the water was toxic because it affected the humans. So if the guy fixed your water, why would you be picking on him?
And I'm Dory. Hello, I'm Dory.
Oh, I'm Dory Ehrig.
Yeah, I didn't want them to miss that because that is the world's longest question, and we appreciate that.
Well, one thing, I have wondered about this for a long time, and if you notice, there's a Mother's Day application here. There's 2 she-bears. And there's a Father's Day application. Don't pick on your bald-headed dad. Love them. But also, there's a ton of good material here for a youth group sermon, and I've never heard this preached on.
Amen.
Okay.
And
so,
Dory is a blessing. Can you tell? Have you seen anybody else that comes with 2 Bibles, 1 sheet?
Oh, this one's been bugging me. Oh, and by the way, the word mall, okay, this is a real old dictionary, but it even had the word M-A-L-L. But anyway, it comes from Middle English, Old French, Latin, malleus, which means hammer. So that's where that word is derived from. But so to be mauled is where you get really bruised up, smashed, punched down. But I would imagine whoever these she-bears were, there were probably some dead kids. And I had a lot of brothers, so I could see kids doing this. Were there a few Hebrew kids doing that too? I mean, it doesn't say. I doubt it, but they might have. Okay.
Dory, you are fun. And Dory's one of our Wednesday night BC and Deers, and I'm so used to her. In fact, you asked a question about 2 Kings last month.
I love these old
I know, I remember. Okay, several things. One thing is, I mean, Dory, you heard all of this stuff. Basically, Elisha was as long as we've talked so long about this, and you have to be patient. Verm, I'll be back in a second. I don't know if I'll ever be back because I have 2 more, but you can rest for a second, and then, because I don't want to wonder about your question and worry. But Elisha, remember, Elijah succeeded by Elisha. It was one of the dark times in the children of Israel. They had gone to the worship of false gods in the northern kingdom. You know all of that stuff. This was near the end of the northern kingdom. If you remember that Elijah had been approached in 1 Kings by contingents of soldiers. And you know, Dory was saying, how come the Lord, it says turn the other cheek in the New Testament. How come, he is sending bears to maul youths in the Old Testament? Well, Elijah, when the groups of soldiers came, the squads of soldiers, they were burned up by fire. So we have to see, this is a climactic time in the history of Israel, showing who is representing the Lord as they're going into idolatry. If you study, Dory, in all of your sources there, youths does not mean, we're not talking about sweet, smiling little middle schoolers singing, or Marcia Visser's We Praisers, or anything in between. Basically, if you remember, you could not be a priest until you're 30. You couldn't be a Levite until, it's all in the Old Testament. You can look all these up. That's why Jesus began his ministry at about the age 30. You couldn't be a helper in the Levitical area until you're 25. And before that, what they called you from this time period down is you were a youth. You were not yet old enough to hold either a Levitical help job or a priestly job. And by the way, the priest could only serve until they're about 55 years old. Boy, that sounds almost like you live in France or something. And so there was a time period here where about 25 years of hard work, or 30 for the Levites, but those below that. So don't think, single-digit age people, or even, helpless little middle schoolers. These were college-age kids, most likely, and they were mocking. And they were mocking the representative of God. And so that's what you're reading here. He turned around, he looked at them, he pronounced a curse on them in the name of the Lord. And basically, all he said is, Lord, basically, it's vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And I think the lesson for us to learn here is that we're not supposed to take vengeance on people. He just said, Lord, you see what they're doing to your name, do whatever you want, which is what David did. And David says, the Lord returned to Shimei. If the Lord sent him, I need it, but if not. And you remember Shimei, as well as everybody else involved in bad things with David, even though David never responded, Solomon did. And all of them were eradicated, Joab, all of that clan of people. So what we're seeing here is when you are attacking the prophet, the representative, the spokesman of God, God has this level of respect that is due. He sent these bears, and they mauled, and you can imagine it must have been quite a sight for 42, but if you think about it, this mocking crowd coming toward this elderly prophet was an ominous thing. 42 young people, a gang of young people. Look what goes on in our country. The hammerings in New York City right now and everything else. And so this was a preservation of the prophet of the Lord, and he just said, Lord, you take care of them, and the Lord took care of them. As far as, and Dory, you ask so many questions at my age, I can hardly remember them, but basically the healing of the springs, that is not a singular. Remember, Moses did the same thing. When the bitter waters at Marah were there, he threw in a piece of wood, and here Elisha throws in they brought him the salt, and he throws it in, and it remains healed to this day, which was down there in the time, probably, it depends on who was codifying this, probably Ezra or someone else, and they said it's still clean water. But just the whole 2 Kings thing, it's a warning to not be disrespectful. That's why even the Apostle Paul, when we get to the book of Acts, and there's a group of mocking priests that were having him slapped, and he said, God smite you, you whitewashed wall. And they said, you're talking to the high priest. And Paul immediately stops, because he knew that no matter who is filling the office, even if it's a president we don't like or a whoever we don't like, you respect the office. And he said, thou shalt not speak evil, Paul said, of the ruler of thy people in the book of Acts. So it was God reminding the children of Israel in the northern kingdom, remember that's where Elijah and Elisha are ministering, in the northern half that was apostatizing. They were the representatives of the living and true God. They held the prophetic office and spoke for God. They were the ones that revealed God to the people. These are not teenagers at the high. I mean, they're probably either older teenagers or college age, under 25ers. And the curse is actually an expression of the vengeance of God. And what he is saying is, Lord, if you want to, you handle them. And the Lord did right away. And the Lord protected his servant. So